I wanted to start this video, with a quote, um, or rather a concept from Dr. Joe Dispenza, which I've been thinking about over the last 24, 48 hours. And it's to do with a conversation that I had a few days ago. And I suppose when you have conversations with people, sometimes they mention things in their past and then they close the door. And if you ask a question about that, they say, "Oh no, I don't need to go back and do that. I don't need to revisit that." And that was a tough time in my life, and no, I don't need to do that anymore. I'm fine. And for me, I think what that indicates is, you know, um, a little bit of a red flag, a little bit of a situation where they've still got some emotional um, connection with that particular part in their history. And that's fine because we all do. And we've all had parts of our lives where we haven't really enjoyed it, to say the least. And I think what happens is we don't want to go back there. That seems quite normal. But what I want to suggest is that it does actually come up in your life again, and it could be weeks, months, years, and it could come up in your life again if you don't process it out. And so, in terms of a concept, Dr. Joe Dispenza says that if you go back to a part in your history and you can look at it without the emotional content, without the emotional triggers, then it's fully processed and it becomes wisdom. And I like that, I think, because even though you think you're over it, if you think about something now, where maybe a part in your history that you had a really tough time, and there is an emotional feeling somewhere in your body, I think what that means to me is that you need to talk about it, open it up, look at it again, obviously on your own time, but process it out so that when you revisit it again, it doesn't have that emotional connection. So it's this packing down, I think, is I don't think it's terribly healthy, put it that way. I think if you start packing stuff down and putting stuff to one side, at some point, like a box from the attic, you're going to unpack it one day and it's going to have the same emotion, it's going to have the same feelings, and it's going to be remain unprocessed. So it's not a time for going back and digging up all of the old stuff. However, I would look at your old stuff and see what kind of emotional connection it has. And if it has very little or none, then it becomes a wisdom. It becomes something that you can learn from. And so I wanted to bring in to this kind of video is something I learned with regard to Ayurvedic medicine, and they have something called Samprapti, which is the stages of disease. Again, if you look at the word disease, we're looking at dis-ease. So I wanted to bring two ideas together, really. So if you are, for example, packing something down, then it's going to come up. It's going to come up in a different way. And so the parts of the Ayurvedic model for disease follow a certain pattern. And I just wanted to go through those and perhaps share those. The way that they look at it in terms of disease manifesting in the body, they say you have too much of something called a dosha, and this is a body type. So, for example, you could have too much heat, too much air, too much water. These are the kind of elements that we're talking about, and so you get an accumulation. If you have too much of something, you get an accumulation in your life. So you could have too much fire or too much spice in your food or whatever. And so you work from accumulation into aggravation. You then move to the idea of it spreading through your body. Then you have a localization part of this model. And you have disease manifesting, and then it diversifies and disrupts the tissues. But in terms of packing down something, the way I want to use this model is what will happen is something will accumulate in your life. There'll be a situation that keeps coming up. And even if you go back and visit it, this accumulation, this will have happened and it will brought you to a particular point. That will have aggravated your life in some way. It would have caused strain. You'll be doing it and doing it and doing it. At some point, you get, as Michael Beckwith mentioned in one of his videos recently, you become sick and tired of being sick and tired. So it aggravates. The next thing is that then starts to spread throughout your life. So or your present moment. Your behaviors will start to change as a result of this accumulation and aggravation. So it starts to spread. I think then what happens is it localizes. It finds a weak spot in your body or a weak spot in your armor, as it were, and it settles. And it starts then to manifest as a disease. And from that, it then disrupts the tissues, it disrupts your life. And so these two models fit together quite nicely, especially when you're talking about packing stuff down, because we get into this kind of consciousness, particularly when we're trying to heal, when we're trying to create change or manifest change. We get into something called a victim consciousness, where it's the kind of why me? It's the kind of it's not fair. I'm under the wrong star sign. I mentioned this in one of my videos recently, where you just have this idea that just nothing's going right, and you've got the wrong kind of vibration going. And it then starts to you start to think, well, is this really happening? Is it really working for me? So it all sort of mixes in for me in the same kind of melting pot. So in order to manifest and in order to move yourself forward and out of that, we all do. Particularly what happens on the Kyle Cease Evolving Out Loud community, which I love. We start to do things like the Kai Lego exercises, and we manifest things, and we start to do that. And in terms of manifestation, that too has some steps, some stages, some component parts that you can put in there. In terms of manifesting, you could be talking to the vision. You can be talking about the vision. You can, so you can start connecting a little bit more. But if you're in this packing down side of things, it's a little bit unhealthy. And it doesn't really help you manifest. All it does, it just keeps you in this kind of state of inertia. So, given that whole model there, which is it's a lot of information, I know, but it just seems to fit quite well, really. So I think if you're trying to manifest change and you're trying to move from this inertia into this um, uh, state of where you're starting to create things in your life, it kind of gives you that potential, I suppose. Then I think you've got to revisit some stuff, I think, and see what kind of wisdom you can glean from that history. And again, if it has the emotional content, take your time, be careful with yourself, and look into what it is and what you can learn from it just by processing it a little bit more. So it's lovely sunny here. I'm hoping it stays with us, and I'll be back shortly with some more content.